Hi, Roland. I would really like to talk to you about your father, Paul Doudt. We'd like to know, who is Paul Doudt?
Paul is my dad. We called him Paul. Yeah. He was involved with OHAD for many years, like over 25 years. He was born in November of 1921 in a small town of Pandora, Ohio. That would be northwest in the area of Lima, Ohio, over there. And he grew up by deaf parents. And he was called, he was a coda who could sign. Now, my dad's parents, grew up on a farm on both sides of the family. And my father's father, Eugene Doudt, had two siblings, brother and sister, that were deaf, and they were at the Indiana School for the Deaf. Now, my grandfather, Eugene, he graduated in the eighth grade level. That's when he graduated. There was nothing higher then. Eighth grade was the most. Today it's just different. Interesting. So my grandmother, Lena, my father's mother, Lena's last name before she was married was Kinsinger. And she was born in Minnesota and went to the Minnesota School for the Deaf. And somehow, all of the family, the entire family, moved to Bluffton, Ohio. And Bluffton is in the Lima area as well. So that's how my parents met. Now, in early childhood, my father was part of the Mennonite religion. And they were very strict, very religious. And he could speak Low German. Now, as he became older, he'd forgotten. He graduated from the Pandora High School, again in the Lima area, and he was young. He was 17. And he married my mother, Nida Mowry, and she went to the deaf school at OSD, Ohio School for the Deaf. And her two sisters as well went to the Ohio School for the Deaf. And then they had two children. One was Sharon, my sister, Cray, and me, Roland. Yeah, he would tell stories of many things back then. He would share, he would talk about the dark age, as they would call it back then. It was really the Great Depression. And those years were from 1929 to 1939. And he was born in 1922. So he saw what was going on back then during the Depression. And it was very hard times. It was very hard to live. So both worked on the farm and they just made do as they could. And then World War II appeared, I guess, in the early 40s. And the Army drafted my father. And he had to go to training to serve his country. And he thought, wow, the farm, my parents are deaf. He was just one child. There was no siblings. So somehow, in his hometown there, the farming community were talking about this. and he should not be sent. So the War Department there found out about it, and they discovered that his parents were deaf, and he was an only child, and he was a farmer. And we need farmers. So they decided to reclassify him from A to F, and he was dismissed.
There's nothing. She doesn't.
Now, milking cows, you milk cows twice a day, morning and night. Morning and night. And one evening, during a school break, I was home, and he was, milking cows, and he was telling me, and he was saying, I remember during the war years, I would have liked to have gone to Europe and helped my country. I would have liked to have done that. I looked at him when he said that. I didn't understand. I was 12, 13. Later I thought about that. That was impressive. I could see his facial expression. He was disappointed. That's what he was disappointed about. And my neighbor, he went to war. He went to Normandy. And he only lasted a day. He was gone. There were others too. They were gone. And it just, it was heartbreaking. So he did become involved with OHAD. And I was around 12, 13 years old at the time. And he served on the board of managers for over 25 years. And my father was the last president of OHAD. On the day-to-day operations. And this was under Supervisor Hoover and also Lancome, Dr. Lancome, and then after him was Superintendent Atkinson until 1979 when they set up CCI, Columbus Colony Incorporated, and they phased out OHAD.
What made your father make the decision to volunteer for OHAD? How did that happen? How did he get so involved?
Yes, that was interesting. It was just by accident, really. Just accident, just happenstance. If you remember, Everett Kennedy, he was the printer. He was the teacher of the printing class. And he was also on the board of managers at the same time as secretary. And that was the board of managers. And they could see that the Ohio Board of Health were asking all these, demands now, and regulations were appearing. We had the land, Columbus Colony Inc. had the land, we had the farmland, and at that time, what do we do with it? Because why? Ohio, the state of Ohio, learned that the old home for the aged deaf, OHAD, worked the farm. They milked the cows. They planted the seeds for the gardens. They would work the farm. And the women would can and sew and cook. And then the gardening and the cows, that's how they, made a living, and it wasn't allowed. Now what do? We were stuck. So they would ask my father, can you come and help us? Give us some feedback. What do we do with the land? What do we do with the land now? Can you help us? So he got involved and he helped, because at that time, he was also the board of trustees of his hometown. And he got a lot of information there, and he knew how, to conduct business like that. the deaf didn't know what to do at the time. So we helped them and how we could meet the needs for the deaf elderly. So we would talk with the federal government to get cash allowances, things like that. I'm just explaining this, very briefly. Now, Everett Kennedy, he knew that I was at the school and that my father was a coda and that my father was a farmer. So he brought him in to help on the board of managers, and that's how he got involved. And, conducted meetings, and they went from there. And if you remember, in the 20s and then to the 40s, at that time, the old home for the aged deaf was on a farm, and they planted and they, fed the cows and milked the cows. Then from the 50s, from the early 50s, they had many rules and regulations now. And the residents could not, quote, work. It wasn't allowed at that time.
You have a lot of deafness in your family. Your grandparents, um, do they still did they still live in Lima? And then there was also OHAD. So the services, did they have services for the deaf people or to help? I am just wondering about, your grandmother and your grandfather. Did they continue to live in Lima or what happened there?
Well, both my parents and grandparents had the farm. It was a joint farm until my grandfather passed away in 1963. During my parents, who were working the farm, they would work during the day on the farm, and they would look over my grandmother, and they knew that OHAD had a home, not a nursing home. Let's make it clear, it was a home. And it was a place where she could go to stay and sleep and eat and talk with her friends, at the home, as we call it. That's how my grandmother, uh, spent the rest of her life at the Fairchild Building from 53 on. So they had a new wing that was added, and it was skilled nursing home care. They switched it around from Ohio Home for the Aged Deaf care to nursing home care. And that's how it went from there. And I want to emphasize that the skilled nursing home was never finished for phase two. Phase one, that wing on the right side from Sunbury Road, you could look at it on the right side of the building. You can see that there was a wing there on the right side. And then they planned to build phase two for the men on the other side, on the left side of the building. But it never happened. It was changed. The plans changed.
Do you remember visiting your grandmother? Do you remember visiting her and can you describe, what it looked like at that time when you visited with your grandmother when she was at Fairchild and how she interacted with her friends?
It's much different than what it is today compared to the old times, yes. They had their own individual rooms, big rooms. They had the bed in there and, different pieces of furniture. And then also, it was friendly. You had a family gathering around the dinner table for dinner. It had a library. You could go there and sew. You had many different activities. I think we had two or three, I think. If I go upstairs, there were 2 floors above the first, yes. Now, at that time, in 53, when she moved there, it became a skilled nursing home care and it was now, not as warm environment that it was when it was quote unquote the home. So that's because the State Department, required special care. And at that time, the the wings were dropped, as you can see here. Yeah, this was connected to the nursing home right there. Because there was one man from Oklahoma, his name was Hume, Hume. He was at a board meeting, and I remember that. It was the hot, heated discussion with Dr. James Flood. And Dr. Flood's dream was, and what Hume's dream was, were different. Hume emphasized what the federal government was offering in housing, HUD, and that's low income housing. And they offered that to the deaf. And this way they could, live in a nice place even though they had low income. So that started in 73, that idea of getting that going. And my father was involved with Dr. Flood and the board members or board managers, and then OSDAA Board of Governors. They all worked together. They were wonderful leaders, and they worked hard and worked, together in getting this going, throwing in ideas, brainstorming to get to the dream of what Columbus Colony is by the time we hit 1979.
Wow, he really had a golden heart, gave so much of his time. And now many things have changed. And from what we have today with Columbus Colony Housing 1, Columbus Colony Housing 2, and Columbus Colony Elderly Care, the nursing home. What do you think, or how do you think your dad would feel if he could see these new facilities, these new buildings? Do you think he would continue to be involved?
Well, from what I can remember, he started to get involved in 1954, or maybe a little before. The board member years from 1954 to 1978. I was about to say 79, but it was 78. And then it was phased out. So there's still some parts that needed to be done, but he fully retired when he became older. And I'd like to emphasize that, he always said that the people were wonderful. They were dedicated. And how they went from beginning to end, all of them, and all those leaders, they really had a golden heart. He really enjoyed working with us. And he himself never dreamed that I would be involved as much, and that my son, Daryl, Doudt as well. And then now, another generation, my grandson, Joshua. We have 4 generations now. My father, myself, Daryl, and now Joshua. So there's 4 generations. Very interesting.
Roland, through your experience, have you ever seen deaf people who have already lived in the OHAD or in the skilled nursing home? Have you seen them? Have you met them? When you saw their faces, did they look good? Were they involved in group activities?
Oh, yes. The most impressive to me that's etched in my brain. I will never forget this. When I was young, I think it was a cold day. I believe it was in the fall. And I went down. Maybe you would remember that the OSD kids, they would go home for holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, like 4 times a year. And then one of those school breaks for me, my dad took me to one of the meetings, the board of manager meetings. And I'd play around, and I'd go outside and see the farm buildings, the structures, and I'd see the deaf men milking cows and working. Milking cows and just looking around, just seeing what they were doing. It's fascinating. And as they worked, they would hire hearing men to like watch over them. Like where's the milk going? Got to make sure the milk's cold and sold. Many different workers. It was interesting to watch all this. And to add one more thing that was fascinating to me, fascinating story, is a fellow by the name of Wendell Clark. He's my cousin, second cousin. My dad and him were cousins. So Wendell's mother, my grandfather's sister, okay, well, we'll put that aside. Wendell, during his school years at the Ohio School for the Deaf, on the breaks, they would go to OHAD, and they would have corn husking machines, called corn husking procedures there, where they would snip off the corn and it would flow into the bins. So Wendell Clark was involved with Key Club, and the contest was corn. It was husking corn and going all the way down the line. That was at OHAD. And then Richard Crossan, that's his name sign with the C on both sides of the chin, he would be there. He was in Key Club. There were many activities that he did as well with the residents. They'd be involved from the school. But today, the OSD students now, they're not involved with Columbus Colony at all. It's a different time. It's changed. And what's more, the Board of Education would not allow them to be involved because of policy and the changes to those policy. And the children there don't have the opportunities like they did in the past. It's really changed.
As your dad, I know he has now passed.
He passed away at age 81 in 2002. I think in November. Not sure what day exactly, but it was in 2002 he passed away. He was sick. I offered him that he could go to Columbus Colony, and he said, no, I just want to sleep. I just want to stay here at the farm. And we said, okay, until his time, and he was gone. He started on the farm, he ended on the farm.
Well, that is a wonderful story, and he sounds like a wonderful person. Do you? I'm sure you feel very proud of all of the time that your father had donated, and that he was the sacrifices that he made, and the time he spent driving to Columbus to OHAD and back home again, and all the responsibility he had of the care of the animals and taking care of the farm. Wow.
Yes, it was a lot of responsibility. But he said he wouldn't miss it. He loved working with the deaf people. That's where his heart was. And if you remember, he's a coda. And he married someone that he found where the family was deaf. He had a deaf wife. He had 2 hearing impaired children. That means my sister was hard of hearing and I was deaf. And we were all together. You know, yes, he had the heart for the deaf.
Hi, Ron. You and I have had so much fun working with Dawn on this project, and it's made us look back and remember those good old days. You know, both of us are codas, and our parents were involved in the deaf community, and I just remember every fall we would go to the OHAD building and we would have our picnic, and all of us kids would play, and we'd see the cows, and we would sometimes feed the cows, and we would play in the barn, and we had such a good time. And I can remember that deaf blind man who was making the brooms. I was so fascinated with him. He always had a smile on his face, and he was happy, and I was just so puzzled as to how that could happen. And as I look back, those were really wonderful times.
It's true. It's true. And my dad, who was part of OSDAA, he lived far away, 5 hours, 5.5. Lived in Youngstown, and a long time ago there was no freeways, so all the way to Columbus. But we went to one I know picnic, and we went, and it was really different from what I've experienced before. Many people came, and I could see the kids were over there playing near a haystack, bales piled up. So I would go over and I'd see the kids, and I would wonder what. Come on, so I felt like I was on top of a mountain. I felt cool. It was down, and there was this beautiful blonde girl with her eyes saying, "Come on, you can do it. Come on." Tough jump. Ooh. Ankle, not broke, but oh.
I'm so sorry, Ron. I'm so sorry.